Hello students, myself Jinalisha from Saraswat International Academy. Today students we will discuss the next part of our chapter, the living world, the chapter 1 from unit 1. Now students, lastly we have studied the certain characteristics of living organisms. We know the main characteristics of living organisms are growth, reproduction, then the next property is metabolism, the next one is cellular organization, and lastly the consciousness. These are the 5 main properties possessed by living organisms. Out of that, the first 2 properties, that is growth and reproduction, they are called as the non-defining properties, and the remaining 3, that is metabolism, cellular organization and consciousness, they are basically the defining properties. We know what are defining properties. All those properties without any exceptions, they are called as the defining properties. We have already studied in detail the 3 characteristics of living organisms, that is growth, reproduction and metabolism. So students, today we will study regarding the next characteristic of organism, and that is the cellular organization. Now students, we know that all the living organisms, whether they are single celled organism or any organism, whether an organism is a simple organism or it is a complex organisms, all the organisms, they are composed of cell. That is very important thing. So basically we can say that cell is the basic unit of life. What is cell? It is a basic unit of life. All the organisms, whether the organism is a simple organism or whether it is a complex organism, whether it is a small bacteria or whether it is a complex human being, each and every organisms, they are composed of cell. So basically, how can we define a cell? So it is the structural and functional unit of all the living organisms. Students, what is cell? It is the structural and functional unit of all the living organisms, which means all the living organisms are composed of cell, and whatever activities occur within the living organisms, they are all due to the cells, which means cell is a structural and functional unit of a living organisms. Now students, on the basis of the number of cells, the living organisms can be grouped into 2 categories. One is the unicellular organism and other is the multicellular organism. On the basis of the number of cells present in the living organisms, then the living organisms are divided into 2 categories. Which are those 2 categories? Unicellular organisms and multicellular organisms. Now what are unicellular organisms? Those organisms which are composed of single cell. The organisms which are composed of single cell, what are they called as? They are called as the unicellular organisms. Next one is the multicellular. Multi means many. So those organisms which are composed of many cells, what are they called as? Multicellular. Here you can break the word into 2. Unicellular. Uni means one. Cellular, that is cell. So those organisms which are composed of single cell, what are they called as? Unicellular organism. All the bacteria, what are they? They are the unicellular organisms. Multicellular, multi, many, cellular cell. So those organisms which are made up of many cells are called as the multicellular organisms. Human beings, tiger, plants, mango tree, etc. They are the examples of the multicellular organisms. Now students, the cell contain 2 important components. One of the component is the protoplasm and another one is the organelles. The cell is composed of 2 important components. One is protoplasm and another one is cellular organelles. The living matter of the cell basically is the protoplasm, and cellular organelles, they are the parts of the cell. So basically the protoplasm and these organelles, they work and they perform the cellular, or you can say they perform the several activities at cellular level and result into the various life processes. Now students, in living organisms many activities, as I told you, metabolism, all in the living organism thousands of activities, thousands of reactions occur at a time. So, and these reactions, they bring about the different life activities. Say for example, if I consider human being, we carry out digestion, we carry out respiration, we carry out circulation, etc. All these are what? They are the life activities. Now, how are these life activities performed? So, basically the life activities are carried out by the cell. Now, what in the cell carries out these life activities? So, cell, as I told you, it is composed of protoplasm and cellular organelles. So, both of these, that is protoplasm and organelle, they perform the activities at the cellular level and they bring about the various life processes. So that is regarding the cellular organization. Now this cellular organization, as the cells are present only in the living organism, none of the non-living organism contains the cell. Cells are present only within the living organism. None of the non-living object contains the cell. So from this we can say that cellular organization is the defining property of the life. Which type of property is cellular organization? It is the defining property. Which defining properties we know? Any property without any exception. Here there are no exception. It is compulsorily that all the living organisms are made up of cells. So that is a defining property, and no non-living objects basically will contain the cell. So hence the cellular organization is considered as a defining property of the life. Now students, the next property of living organisms is consciousness. So first of all, what is consciousness? Now students, all the living organisms, they have the ability to respond to the environmental stimuli, whatever indications are given by environment. So living organisms have the ability to respond to the environmental stimuli, and this property of the living organisms to respond to environmental stimuli, that property is called as consciousness. So basically the living organisms, they sense the surrounding environment as well as they respond to the environmental stimuli. Living organisms have the ability to sense the environment and accordingly they respond to that environmental clue. Are you getting my point? The living organisms have the ability to sense the environment, surrounding environment, and accordingly it will respond to the environmental clue. What is that property of the living organism called as? It is called as consciousness. And this is the most complicated feature of all the living organisms. Of all the properties, of all the characteristics of the living organisms, the most complicated feature of any living organism is the consciousness. Now, it is very much important for you to know that all the living organisms, that is from simplest prokaryotes to the most complex eukaryotes, have the ability to sense the environment. So whether the organism is a simple bacteria or whether the organism is a most complex human being, all the living organisms ranging from simplest prokaryotic organisms to complex eukaryotic organisms, they all have the ability to sense the environment. Now they respond to various environmental clues. That environmental clues may be either physical or chemical, or it may be biological. So the living organisms, they respond to physical, chemical and biological stimuli. Now, students, one example of the stimuli, how human beings respond to this stimuli. We all have well developed sense organs. So with the help of sense organs, we are able to sense the environment, and accordingly whatever messages are given by environment, that messages may be in the physical form, it may be in the chemical form, or it may be in the biological form. We respond to that particular stimuli. Say for example, one example of consciousness I will tell you. In the example in the human beings, right? Suppose you touch a hot object or hot plate. What you will do? What will happen? When we touch the hot object, say for example with the hand, I am touching the hot object. Suppose this object is a hot object and I am touching it. So what immediately my body will do? Immediately, through some reactions, I immediately remove this hand. So what is that process called as? That is called as the consciousness. We have the ability to sense the environmental stimuli. That environmental stimuli was in the formation of what? It was in the form of the temperature. As the object's temperature was very high, the heat was there, what happened? I immediately removed by hand. That property is called as what? It is called as the consciousness. And now whatever reactions are there, whatever environmental messages are there, these environmental stimuli may be in the physical, chemical and biological forms. Now this example I told you regarding the human beings. But it is not only human beings which possess this stimuli or this property, but this property is, as I told you, it is present in all the living organisms. Like plants, they respond to the external factors like light, temperature, water, other organisms, pollutants, etc. So plants also respond to the various external factors like light, temperature, water, other organisms, pollutants, etc. I will tell you one example of the plant. Lichens, basically they are the group of organisms containing algae and fungi in them, right? They contain algae and fungi in them. Now these lichens, they are unable to grow in the area which is highly polluted. So from this we can say that lichens have the ability to respond to pollutants. Same way students, one example is of plant roots. Normally we know that roots, they are growing in the soil. Basically they respond to what? Water. So that is called as the response given by the plants in the presence of water. So all the living organisms can respond to that stimuli. So all the organisms, they show the consciousness to the environmental clues. We will see some examples. Now we know that some plants, they flower only in the particular seasons, right? You might have seen that there are some plants which flower only in the particular season. And students, very important thing is, flowering is a process which is affected by the period of available light. Light duration plays the very important role in the process of flowering, and this flowering affects the process of sexual reproduction in the plants. So what is it responding to? It is responding to light. So again, what is that property called as? It is called as the consciousness. So certain plants, they flower only in the particular season, that is photoperiodism. The light duration plays very important role in the process of flowering in plants. Another examples in animals, that is certain animals, they perform breeding only in the particular season. So what are they called as? They are called as seasonal breeders. So they are able to, these plants and animals, They are able to respond to the external stimuli. Say for example, that external stimuli is light. In the presence of light only, certain plants and animals can perform the process of reproduction. So basically, what is that? Photoperiod, or it is light duration. It affects the reproduction in seasonal breeders like plants and animals. Seasonal breeders are the organisms, living organisms, which carry out the process of reproduction only in the particular seasons. So, this is the example of the consciousness. These are certain examples of consciousness. Another example is all the living organisms. They respond to the chemicals which are entering in their bodies. All the living organisms, they have the ability to give response to the chemicals which enter in their body. Now students, human beings have an additional property, and that additional ability present in the living organisms is called as the self-consciousness, right? We human beings have the additional ability, and that additional ability present in us is called as a self-consciousness. Now students, what is self-consciousness? So basically, we human beings have very well developed nervous system, and we have also developed the skill of communication, right students? We human beings, we have very well developed nervous system. That is, we know that we have brain, we have spinal cord, we have nerves. So our nervous system is very well developed, right? As well as we have developed the skill of communication. We are able to communicate with each other, right? This ability is not present in any other living organisms. Yes, animals will possess the nervous system, but very well developed nervous system is present only in the human beings. And another property is the communication skills. So, these human beings, when human beings are concerned, we have very well developed nervous system, and we have also developed the communication skill. So, we have developed supreme level of communication, which is not present in any other organisms. So, this ability which is present in us, what is that property called as? It is called as self-consciousness. Students, what is that property called as? It is called as the self-consciousness. So, due to this property, what we can do? We can respond very fast to the external stimuli, and we can even think or predict about the possible changes of the surrounding, so it can prepare according to the surrounding situation. As we have very well developed nervous system, as well as we have supreme level of communication, what we can do? We can respond to the stimuli very quickly, very fast, as well as we can predict about the possible changes of the surrounding, so that it can prepare according to the surrounding situation, right? So this ability of the self-consciousness is considered as the topmost ability which is present only in the human beings. None other living organisms possess the property of the self-consciousness. But students, one important thing, that in human beings, it is very difficult to define a living state in certain situations, like a patient lying in coma who is supported by machines which replace the heart and lungs. They are brain dead but with no self-consciousness. So students, there are certain human beings which are, in them it is difficult to define the living state, like in certain situations, like certain patients who are in coma, they are supported by the machines. These machines do the work of heart and lungs. So basically machines, they replace the heart and lungs of that particular patients. So such patients who are in coma, they are brain dead, which means that their brain is not working, right? So patients of the coma, they are brain dead. So they do not have the property of self-consciousness. They do not have the property of self-consciousness. They will show consciousness, but they won't show the property of the self-consciousness. So this is the most important property of all the living organisms, that is consciousness. Now, as consciousness is present only in the living organisms, it is the defining property of the living organisms. Clear, students? So that is regarding consciousness, which means the ability of the living organisms to sense the surrounding environment and according to that respond to the environmental stimuli, which may be either physical, chemical, or it may be biological. Now students, we will deal with the organization in living organisms. Now students, the living organisms, the body of the living organism, it is organized into various components and subcomponents, and these components and subcomponents, they interact with each other and is responsible for the functioning of whole body. Are you getting my point? The students, living organisms, their body is composed of various components, and it is these various components which interact with each other and perform the functioning of whole body. Now we will see what is the organization in the living organisms. So basically, see, there are protons, neutrons and electrons which combine and form the atoms. Atoms, they form the compounds. Compounds will together comprise the cells. The group of the cells form the tissues. The group of the tissues form the organs. Group of organs, they form the organ system, and all the organ system together will form the organism. So this is the general organization in living organisms. Now see students, here I have drawn one line. So this differentiates that in this organization there is a physical hierarchy. Hierarchy means different levels, as well as there is a biological hierarchy. There are two hierarchies. One is the physical hierarchy, which is basically the non-living hierarchy, and there is a biological hierarchy, which is basically the living hierarchy. Now, in the physical hierarchy, what happens? The various non-living components, they aggregate, and what do they form? They form the compounds. In the physical hierarchy, various non-living components like protons, neutrons, electrons, they aggregate, and what do they form? They form the atoms. Atoms, they aggregate, and what do they form? They form the compounds, and it is the compounds which finally enter the living world in the form of the cells. Are you getting my point? There are two hierarchies. One is physical hierarchy and the biological hierarchy. In the physical hierarchy, various non-living components like protons, neutrons, electrons, they aggregate, resulting in the formation of atoms. Atoms aggregate and resulting in the formation of compounds. It is the compounds which enter the living world in the form of the cells. Now we will study regarding the biological hierarchy. Now we know that each cell is composed of various organelles. Now the group of the cells which perform the similar functions, they form the tissues. Group of tissues forms the organ. Organs form organ system, and finally the organization. So this is complete organization in the living organisms. So basically students, all the living phenomena, that is whatever activities occur within the living organisms, whatever life processes they occur in the living organisms, basically they are due to the interactions between the different component of an individual or the organs or the tissues or the cells. What does that mean? Whatever activities which occur in the living organisms, they are the results of the interactions between the cells, they are due to the interactions between the tissues, or they are due to the interactions between the organs. All the activities occurring in the living organisms, they are due to the interactions between the different components of an individual. What are individual? That is living organism. What are living organisms composed of? Organ system. So, the functioning of the living organism is due to the interactions between the organ systems, or it may be due to the interactions between the organs or between the tissues or between the cells. So from this we can say, students, this is very important. Properties of tissues are not present in the constituent cells but arise as a result of interactions among the constituent cells. Listen very carefully. The properties of tissues are not present in constituent cells. What is tissue? It is a group of cells performing the similar functions. That group of cell is called as a tissue. Now the statement is, properties of the tissues are not present in the constituent cell. That is, say for example, I consider bone as a tissue. We all know that bone is a hard tissue which is composed of the cells. Now, what is the function of the bone? Basically, the bone, it provides the framework to the body, right? What is the main function of the bone? It provides the framework to our body. But is each and every cell of the bone possessing this property? No. This property, that is to provide the framework to the body, it is not present in each and every cell of bone. So what happens? All the cells of the bone, they interact with each other, and this interaction is responsible for the functioning of the bone, right? So properties of the tissues are not present in the constituent cell. So, first of all, we will take the example. It will be more clear to you. We will take again the example of the bone. We know that bone is a hard tissue, right? What is its function? It provides the framework to the body. But the cells present in it do not have this property. Bone is a tissue. As bone is a tissue, it is composed of what? It is composed of the cells. Now, what is the main function of the bone? The main function of the bone is to provide the framework to the body. Framework means it gives a shape and it gives a form to the body, right? The bones, they provide the shape and form to the body. Now students, this property of the bone, that is to provide the framework of the body, it is not present in each and every cell of the bone, right? The property, that is to provide the framework to the body, this property is not present in individual cells of the bone. But when is this property given to the bone? When all the cells of the bone, they interact with each other, then they bring about the functioning of the bone. So, bone, which is a hard tissue, and it provides a framework to the body, but the cells present inside it do not have this property. So, students, are you clear with this particular statement? That properties of the tissues are not present in the constituent cells. That is, the tissues are made up of the cells. whatever functioning of the tissue is there, whatever function a tissue perform, that function may not be performed by each and every cells of that particular tissue. But how is that functioning properties? Interaction among the constituent cells. Are you getting my point? Same way, the other statement, the properties of cellular organelles are not present in the molecular constituent of organelle, but arise as a result of interaction among the molecular components comprising the organelle. Organelle are the parts of the cells, right? Say for example, I consider mitochondria as a particular organelle. We all know that mitochondria is called as the powerhouse of the cell. That is, it has the ability to release the energy. Mitochondria, whose function basically is to provide the energy. It is called as the powerhouse of the cell. Now students, this mitochondria is made up of the various, what is it made up of? It is made up of the various molecular components, like it contains proteins, it contains lipid, it contains DNA, RNA, etc. It is made up of the various molecular components. Now students, all the molecular, say for example, proteins won't perform the function of the release of energy. Lipids directly won't perform the release of the energy. But it is all these molecular components which will interact with each other and bring the functioning of the particular organelle, right? So basically, the properties of the organelle are not due to the molecular constituent of the organelle, but it arises as the result of interactions between this molecular component. Whatever is the function of the organelle, that function of the organelle is not due to the molecular component, but it is due to the interactions between these molecular components which form that particular organelle. So from this, we can conclude that the phenomena of interaction between the various components of the body results in the hierarchy of organization. Why this hierarchy is observed? The reason is the interactions which occur amongst the various components of the body. As the interaction occurs between the various components of the body, it results in the hierarchy of organization. And students, whatever life processes are taking place basically are the result of this interaction and coordination. As these interactions are taking place, this brings about the various life processes in the living organisms. And this complexity in organization, you can see complexity is increasing. Simple molecules forming atoms, forming compounds, cells, tissues, organs, organ system and organisms. So, you can see the complexity is increasing. What is it? The body is becoming, or it is the complexity which is increasing continuously. So, this complexity enables the living organisms to self-replicate, to evolve, to self-regulate and to respond to stimuli. As the organization is complex, it enables the living organisms to self-replicate, to evolve, to self-regulate as well as to respond to stimuli. Now students, all the living organisms that is present, past and futures, all organisms which are present now, which were present in past and which will be found in future, they are linked to one another by sharing the common genetic material, that is DNA, but to the varying degrees. All the organisms, our ancestors, our descendants, etc., They are linked to each other by sharing the common genetic material, that is DNA, but that is shared to a varying degree. Say for example, the DNA between in me and my parents will be having more similarities. We share the more one, but to further descendants, to our ancestors, it may be less. But we all share the common genetic material DNA, but to the varying degree. And it is the DNA which is responsible for basically the expression of the various characters in the organisms. It is the DNA which is responsible for expression of the various traits in the organism. So from we can say that this biology is the story of earth on life. What is biology? It is the story of earth on basically it is the story of life. It is the story of life on earth. How the living organisms evolved basically is the biology. So students, here we come to the end of this particular topics. Next topic we will study in the later videos. Till now we have basically included which topics? We have completed the characteristics of the living organisms. The next part of the chapter we will be dealing with in the next videos. Thank you students.